Tonight, hashtag, if you want to share on the social media, is React London. If you are interested to talk, and we're always looking for new people, please send us an email to hello@react.london. We do have a code of conduct, so you can check it out on meetup.react.london. And of course, if you're interested to join Red Badgers, please come and talk with us, or you can send an email to jobs@redbadger.com. So we are really happy to be here. Thanks to World Remit, and I'm going to intro Mark from World Remit. Thank you very much for having us, and yeah, he's going to say a few words.
Well, hey, thank you. Welcome everyone. Welcome to World Remit. Sorry the pizzas were a bit late. We did an event about 2 weeks ago and everything worked smoothly, but you can't trust Domino's. We tried. So a few things, just some safety messages. So if there is a fire alarm, there's some fire exit stairs just around the corner there. The toilets are always around there as well. You'll see men and ladies together around the corner there. And also there's some ropes set up along the back there, and as you saw when you were coming through reception, please don't go beyond the ropes. People are still working. We have a 24/7 customer service there, so please stay within the ropes. You'll see security guards there as well. But welcome. How many of you have heard of World Remit? Wow. Cool. So World Remit is a remittance service, similar to Western Union, etc. But our USP is that we send to more developing countries. We offer sending from 50 countries to over 140 countries. And we offer different methods where the recipient can collect the money. So cash pickup, mobile money, bank transfer, etc., which is really good, and that makes us different from all our competitors. We're actually kind of ahead of the game. We've been really good in the last couple of years. Our brand's going up. We've got extra funding, and we actually are looking for developers as well. So please take a moment, look at our careers page, look at the job vacancies that we have. If you need to find out more about World Remit, we have World Remit representees around here. You'll see them in nice blue hoodies standing around there if you want to hear more about what we do. The reason we're hosting React London tonight is obviously to get this community together, but also to introduce World Remit to you guys as well, so you know what we're about. And obviously you can see that we have a great office and great staff and great facilities here as well. So thank you for coming out. I hope you enjoy the evening, and please hang around and talk to our staff if you're interested about World Remit. Take care.
Thank you very much, Mark, and again, thank you for having us. So tonight, the first speaker will be Viktor, and is going to talk about something. The container queries in CSS applied with container queries in React. Yeah, that's the title. So thank you, Viktor.
Thank you. So just allow me for a second until I set things up. Okay. Oh, that's a great start. Okay, let me adjust that size. Oh well. You're gonna see most of it at least. So I'm just gonna start because I don't have much time, roughly about 20 minutes. So hey, my name is Viktor. I'm actually a first-time speaker myself too. So I'm gonna talk about container queries and about how we use them at EventStack to solve our responsive design issues and problems. So I'm not sure how many of you ever heard about container queries before, or element queries. Probably not many of you. So I'm just gonna start from scratch and explain you what the problem is that I'm trying to solve here. So this is just something very, very simple. basically you have an HTML element. We're not talking about React here just yet. And all you want to do is just color the background based on your available space. And if that's all your window size, if that's the all you need to care about, then this is quite simple to do with simple media queries. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. This is a sort of SAS or LAS kind of syntax where you can nest media queries. But that's the basic idea, just focusing on the background colors here. So the problem with that is the moment you want to reuse the same instance or same element or same component, obviously it's still everything is relative to the viewport. And for that reason, everything is just going to have the same background color, which is not ideal when what you would probably expect is to have green when it's greater than 320 pixels and so on and so forth. So let's just compare that syntax with a very similar one, but slightly different. So the idea here is, and this is how the library I'm going to show you in a second works, is that instead of applying styles when the viewport orientation or size changes, instead of that you can define a container in which you can change the styles for the container itself or its elements or its descendants. So it should be a fairly similar syntax. So coming back to the same example, now it works, and that's what I would expect. And I don't think it's too complicated either. That was one of the main goals of coming up with this syntax too. So again, this is something that you probably would expect to work when you start testing things. So if you, obviously this is a very, very simple example, but if you imagine a lot more complicated component with a lot of elements inside of it, and then you start rendering out children's and start nesting things, then you would still expect everything to work, which is presented here. So what is container query exactly? And it really boils down to just, so it basically just allows you to change styles based on a target element size. It's not really that different from media queries, except that media queries have an explicit target being the viewport or the window, while with element queries you can have any target really that you want, which is usually going to be your root element in your React component. So just to explain the naming, what container really refers to, first there were element queries, where all you could really do is apply styles to a certain element based on its own dimensions or orientation. And that's all right, I guess, but it doesn't really enable us a lot of other opportunities which container queries do, because those can actually apply different styles for descendants to, and not just the element itself. So a container can basically be any element, and as I already said, in the context of a React component, it's going to be probably going to be your root element. So I'm talking about just okay. Not much better, is it? So anyway, I'm talking about a very specific implementation of container queries here, which is a library I made roughly about a year ago. And the way it works is that you're probably used to import CSS to your React components, unless, of course, you're using one of those JavaScript, well, CSS in JS solutions. But if you're not, you're probably quite used to importing CSS in your components using a Webpack loader. And what my library does is it has two main components, one of which is a PostCSS plugin, and the other one is a React component. And what you do is you just pass in the CSS, pass through this CSS through this plugin, and it strips out all the container query related syntax. And then you can feed that JSON JavaScript object to your React component, which then takes care of everything for you. So I'm not sure how many of you are used to setting up post CSS. I'm quite actually one of my favorite things, but this is basically this is basically a very minimalistic setup, and don't worry, you can still use your Sass and less toolchain and just have it on top of it. But just for reference, this is something that you could use, and then this is the very minimum I would recommend to use with it. These are the post CSS plugins that basically sort of allows you to have a Sass or less-like experience. You have nested functionality there, obviously auto prefixer, and at the very bottom you have the container query plugin, which is going to take care of managing your stats. So that looks a little bit broken too, but I think it's big enough for you to see. So basically what happens here is at the very top you import the CSS file, or in this case your post CSS file, and the plugin automatically creates a stats object just aside your post CSS file. And you can just re-import it with Webpack, which handles JSON objects for you automatically, so no loaders needed to set up there. And then it's actually 2 bits, or 2 ways of enabling container queries for your component. The top one is just a higher order component, which most of you are probably quite familiar with. You just pass in your component and then the stats objects that you got, and you can also go with a render prop solution, which seems to be getting a little bit more traction. And also the big difference between the two is that if you're using the render prop, then you also have a size property which has the root components dimension, so your height and width is there, which is going to be very useful. I'm going to show it in a bit in a demo where you can, depending on the size, you might not only just want to change styles, but you might want to replace the whole component somewhere, replace children, or show or hide something in the HTML. So you can do that with the render prop solution. So just a quick note that you probably already realized that this is a browser tab, so all of these demos are live embedded in this presentation and having the plugin, well, doing its job. This is called Spectacle, I think, and all of these are basically React components, so that's the reason I could use the actual demos. So this is slightly more complicated. This basically uses the previous ideas and syntaxes I showed you. The interesting thing about this is that you can see show replies button there, which, depending on the component's size, the available size, may or may not be expanded. And as you can see, I nested them, so all the nested components work and behave the same way too. And another interesting thing is that it works very well with Flexbox and Grid, because some people might think that if I have a container query sort of solution, I could just replace my Flexbox and my Grid with container query, but I would not actually recommend that. That's not the point. It's basically, you can imagine the container queries work the same way with Grid and Flexbox, the way that media queries work, so you can have more refined breakpoints. So here, obviously I stripped out the noise, so this is basically the previous demo and just left the interesting bits in. So you can see I'm changing the flex direction and text align margins, just played around with a little bit really. And the other part, the interesting part of the JavaScript is this is using the render props. So I'm getting the size here, and I have my render replies, which again I hid because it's not that interesting. The interesting bit is that based on that size property, I can decide whether to expand that button or not. And yeah, I think that's basically it with this slide. If you don't like importing the JSON like this, you can have a different solution too. There's going to be probably a Webpack loader if later, which would just expose those stats right in that import for you. But that's currently just a plan. So anyway, some highlights. I think it's very well. One of the main goals I had in mind is to have a very approachable and familiar syntax, because the other I wouldn't call them competitors, maybe rivals I have with container query solutions. They sort of have very, very weird CSS-like syntaxes that are very hard to wrap your head around. And it was made for React. We use it with React in our components for over a year now. Seems to be working very, very well for us. And another very interesting thing, not sure if you heard about ResizeObserver. You probably have it if you use Chrome, because it was, I think it was released in Chrome 64. And so what ResizeObserver does, and the library uses ResizeObserver or a polyfill, obviously. So what it allows you is to react to resize changes before the browser actually paints, which is great because then you can change your layout a little bit. You can apply styles, and then the browser goes back to layout, and then you can again react to size changes. It goes back, and then after you're done and after you did everything, it finally paints. So there is no lag, no performance issues in that regard. So that unlocks a lot of possibilities. But obviously, if you're using older browser or others that don't support ResizeObserver, then a polyfill is used, which can have a little bit of delay, but usually it's not that noticeable. And it really depends on your goal, whether it annoys you or not. And the other thing is that I think it's very important is CSS preprocessing during build time. And since we are talking about React here, we probably have a build step, Webpack, something similar at least. So I think I can assume that you can put CSS pre-processing into your build chain, which saves us a lot of performance overhead in the browser, because you wouldn't want to deal with CSS parsing in the browser, even though it's possible. So just some thoughts about container queries and about the future of container queries. It's an idea that probably came about like 10 years ago. It's not a new idea. That's why there are a lot of other plugins out there, even though they are not really React focused. But there are a lot of people working on this. And one of the big blockers, I guess, for container query adoption and implementation for browsers, to make it natively supported in browsers, is that it has some sort of loop issues. So you could potentially create a style which would then change its style continuously. So that's why it's a bit hard to implement, and browsers haven't really tackled this issue yet. But anyway, first things first, Houdini. This is something that's going to allow us to sort of reach into the browser's CSS engine. And it really consists of multiple parts, one of which is only the layout API. And the paint API was already released in Chrome 65, I think, which is the current development branch, not yet stable. But with what you can do with it is to basically kind of doing the opposite of what CSS in JS is, because you can refer to JavaScript in your CSS. And that obviously allows for, well, allows for a lot of very interesting implementations, because you can imagine coming up with your own layout, like container queries, for example, or make a grid V2 or something like that, if that's your thing. And lastly, I would like to mention the WICG, which is the Web Incubator Community Group, part of the V3C. And so I said that this thing came, well, the original idea must have been thought of like 10 years ago or so. And again, we are kickstarting a little bit of discussion on this, involving some Mozilla folks and Chrome people, and a lot of library authors, designers. So if you're a little bit interested in this movement to make container queries a natively supported feature, then we are working on it starting this year. So yeah, that's basically it. I encourage you to look at the demos. Everything is set up for you, so you should be able to just online play around with things, because there is so much more to it. I just didn't really have time to show you all the other pieces. Check out the WICG links and the discussions there. And yeah, that's basically it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viktor. And we are going to have some Q&A. Do you have any questions? You may be too hungry. Yes, no, we do have one. Is it on?
Hi.
Good point.
Thank you very much. I love the CSS syntax, but is it possible to use it without React too?
Yep. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Probably should have mentioned it. So originally I wasn't even using it with React, but since it's quite reusable, you're basically, what you're doing is instantiating a class, passing it your stats object that you extracted from the CSS, passing it your element that you want to manage, or want this class to manage. And that's basically it. You're all set. It's going to do everything else for you. So potentially it could work with, oh yes, please, finally. So yeah, potentially it could work with Vue.js, other Vue component libraries, or even without any component library, really. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to follow up on that. What does the stats object do?
Sorry, what's that?
What does the stats object do?
Oh, the stats object. It's so that contains all the extracted bits. So all the container-related syntax, basically your styles that need to be applied under certain conditions. All of those are in JSON, and they are quite human readable too. So you can check that out too if you want.
Great, thanks a lot.
Hi. What would be an advantage of this approach as opposed to using something like style components, which kind of tackles a similar thing of making components reusable and passing them, properties and stuff like that?
Yeah. So style components and CSS in JS is a bit different from this, because they're solving different problems. CSS in JS is basically about scoping your styles, while this is styling based on the available space. And the benefit of using something like this with styled components, you still can't apply certain styles when you have certain amount of space. You can scope your styles so they won't interfere with each other, obviously, but that's not the main point of this project. The main pro for this would be that you can have the same exact component on the same page in different sizes, and they would look different depending on how much space you have available to that particular component. So they are very, very highly reusable from that point on.
So potentially you could actually mix and match if you were to use style components and...
Sorry, I can't really hear
I
you.
said potentially you could maybe mix and match, because from what you're saying, the advantage is the fact that you can actually calculate on the fly what the parent is.
Sorry, I still couldn't catch you. You have to close it very, very close.
Okay,
Hold it
sorry.
very close.
So yeah, I was saying maybe you could mix and match, mix these style components with the what you're proposing here.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So when I first started working on this project, CSS in JS wasn't really a big thing. It was gaining traction, of course, but it wasn't very mainstream. So now I have quite some open issues to think about how the two could work together. But my problem is that it's very hard to decide which one to support, because styled components is only one out of probably 200, or don't quote me on that. There are a lot of libraries out there.
Fair enough. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have any questions?
Testing. Okay, hello. How often does that render prop fire? Is it relative to the breakpoints in your container queries, or is it based on whenever the ResizeObserver underneath fires?
Yeah. So when you have the size and there is a size change, there is a certain precision that it will report. It won't report all like the very, very small changes. And the way the actual styles are applied there's actually a sort of diffing mechanism. So it wouldn't even apply styles that it doesn't need to. It sort of tracks the state of the elements and what styles they have on them. And so it wouldn't do any work if there is no breakpoint that was reached or stepped over, so to speak, so that there are new styles that need to be applied.
Cool, thanks.
No worries.
Thank you very much, Victor. I think, as you could see, the pizza here, so we're going to have a short break. Go for it. Go nuts.